another new feature of this year's convention, a conversation on higher education with chief academic officers. When the planning committee decided to invite a university president to deliver the keynote, as you heard yesterday, they coupled that by saying that we needed to do this panel because it is provosts who really know what's going on. I think there's a provost out there who's agreeing with that. We're pleased to have with us today 3 individuals who serve on or have served their institutions in that role and who serve us today as thought leaders on higher education trends. First here to my left is Dr. Christine Bahr, Provost and Dean of the University at McKendree University, just on the other side of the river in Lebanon, Illinois. A graduate of Fonfon College, now a university here in St. Louis. Her master's degree is from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and her Ph.D. in special education from Indiana University. Christine previously served on the faculty and as interim academic vice president at St. Mary of the Woods College in Indiana. And she's a life member of Phi Kappa Phi Chapter 292 at McKendree. She and I first met a few years ago at the annual Chief Academic Officers Institute of the Council of Independent Colleges. At the other end of the stage is Dr. Loren J. Blanchard, Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at Xavier University of Louisiana. A graduate of Xavier and HBCU, he holds a master's degree in Educational Administration and Supervision from McNeese State University and a Ph.D. in Educational Psychology from the University of Georgia. He previously served as Provost of the Louisiana University system of 8 regional campuses. A sought-after national expert in accreditation planning and implementation, Dr. Blanchard led the effort to seal the state of Louisiana's partnership with NCAID. He also happens to be my son's provost.
Who's a great faculty member.
Okay, we'll just follow that. Thank you. And in between Christine and Loren is Brigadier General retired Dana Bourne, who served for 10 years as Dean of the Faculty at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. A graduate of the Academy, she was the first woman to serve as its Dean. She holds master's degrees in psychology from both Trinity University and the University of Melbourne, and her Ph.D. in industrial and organizational psychology is from Penn State University. Following her retirement from the Air Force last year, she joined the faculty of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government as a lecturer in public policy in the Center for Public Leadership. Dr. Bourne and I became acquainted as members of an accreditation team for the Higher Learning Commission. Now, in case you're wondering why my intros included a personal reference to each of our guests, it's not just because when I told the staff about the way I wanted the dais set up for this session, and they said, oh, like Oprah. It's just who I am, but if I were in the audience, I'd be wondering, what's the common thread among these people on the stage other than their last names all begin? I'll begin with a B. And so now you know that it's...
That's the thread.
That's the thread. And that I know you all. But this is a conversation, thus the room setting is less formal than it has been for governance sessions of the convention. We're going to begin by looking at some of the key issues facing higher education currently, and then we would invite you in the audience to ask questions of the panel. You see that the floor mics are still available for you, and you don't have to wait for an invitation to go forward to them. If you have a question, I'll just stop where we are and at a convenient point and see what you have to say. But let's begin by asking each of you to talk about what you think is the most threatening issue for higher education currently. You want to start, Chris?
Yes, certainly. I work at McKendree University. McKendree has about 3,000 students. We're in rural Illinois. We're affiliated with the Methodist Church. And in fact, McKendree has been around for 186 years. We're the oldest institution in the state of Illinois. We've had some tough times and some good times over those 186 years, of course. But Mary asked me to talk a little bit about what's facing us as a challenge as an institution. Certainly, Enrollment and retention is always the challenge in a small private institution. We do a very good job of bringing students in. It's a very welcoming community. But we find more and more these days that students have difficulty affording a private education or a higher education in general, I should say, after the first year. So we really focus a lot on retention and what we can do to keep students on the path to graduation. That's where we put most of our resources these days. That's where we put new staff. We are constantly thinking about programs that we can launch that will help our students get to the finish line. Enrollment has not been a problem at McKendree. We're actually on the upswing, even as the high school population of Illinois is decreasing. And you might sort of wonder why that would be. Why would we be doing well when the high school population is shrinking? But I think that's because we focus on quality, and we've also tried to bring in those kinds of activities that supplement the academic program. So for us, in this part of the country, in Illinois, that's sports for many students. About 50% of our students are involved in intercollegiate athletics, and that's a challenge as well. It's a good thing. Students are attracted to McKendree because they can play a sport. They've been involved in sports in high school. They continue that interest at the college level. But certainly that's a challenge on their time to balance sports and academics, but something that is just reality. So for us, it's a combination of, our retention issues are related to finances, and that's probably the case for many schools and many students. And then also just helping students to balance all the things that they're involved in, whether it be sports or family activities. The population has kind of changed over the years, and students are doing more than just taking classes.
Anybody else?
Want to go next?
Sure.
I don't want to break the order, but I follow orders, as you know. You sit there. Okay, you go next. I will share, I'm kind of coming from 3 different experiences, and so most recently serving as the Dean at the Air Force Academy is undergraduate only, 4,000 cadets, very much a liberal arts experience in terms of 100 credit hours out of 147 were core, gen ed, so it was very much a balanced foundation of education, but very scientific and engineering rich, because everybody graduates with a Bachelor of Science degree, even if you're in a history major or an English major. But a great opportunity where you can really do some things intentionally and developmentally and be able to assess your students through a overall 4-year experience in athletics, academics, and in leadership and management and character. I went from that environment to Harvard University, teaching at the graduate level, and it's very different. Although I am wearing my other uniform, as people say, I always wear blue suits. I said it takes me a little while. I've only been out since the 1st of October, and still trying to figure out what to do with my hair. But it's a very rich experience to see another approach to education and preparing people to go serve in around the world, basically. I also am serving as an independent director on the Apollo Education Group, and that is basically for-profit education, where one of the biggest schools within the Apollo Education Group is the University of Phoenix. It also has Apollo Global, which includes Open Colleges Australia, as well as several schools for-profit in the Western Hemisphere and in the UK. And so I have kind of a perspective from a for-profit education as well. One of the biggest challenges, I guess, as I look across all of those experiences, one of my colleagues at Harvard, many of you may know Richard Light, who's both in the Kennedy School as well as in the Graduate School of Education, and just a great thinker. He's the publisher of, Making It in College, or Making the Most of College. Thank you. And he's kind of captured what he thinks our 3 priorities are we ought to be focused on right now. One of them is looking at the diversity of the student population, the diversity of types of people that we have who are wanting access and accessibility for learning opportunities. and trying to figure out ways to meet them and help them be the strongest they can be in that experience. Another is really looking at what does it mean to have liberal education in the 21st century? What is that? What does it look like? Even Harvard with all the MOOCs and all the online opportunities, you know, what is it that is the 4-year experience now that we can market to students and why they might pay $50,000 a year to go for a bachelor's degree? And then his third thing that he said we ought to be focused on is more global crises type things. And I think certainly the economy is something that we all feel in every one of our universities and campuses. But there are others as well with regard to cyber and personally identifiable information, certainly on online, and many other types of crises. So I guess I'd answer it by quoting my colleague, who I think is a great thinker on 3 things that are important for us to focus on.
All right.
I'll give a bit of background first about Xavier, as my other 2 colleagues have done for their respective settings. Xavier University of Louisiana, not to be confused with Xavier University of Ohio, unless we're talking about basketball. Then we'll take it. Is the only historically black and Catholic university in the United States. There are a lot of unique features about Xavier that I'll just spend a few moments sharing with you. First and foremost is the fact that Xavier is one of only 2 universities in the United States that's founded by a saint, St. Catherine Drexel. Secondly, Xavier's primary signature is the fact that we have, for the past 25 years, prepared and have sent the largest number of African American students into medical school. In addition to that, Xavier's signature centers on the fact that we have graduated the largest number of African Americans out of medical school. We also have produced the largest number of pharmacists. Now, here's the unique aspect of it, that we are a liberal arts institution, but 70% of our majors are STEM majors. And so you can just imagine the kind of rub that's there in terms of really making sure that we have that commitment, obviously, to preparing students in a very liberal kind of way, as was just mentioned earlier, but also making sure that they are well prepared for STEM disciplines. Prior to the Xavier University, as you heard Dr. Todd mention earlier, I worked for the University of Louisiana system as the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs for that system, serving 8 regional universities. So I'm going to put both hats on for a moment in talking about quick challenges that we see now, not only for Xavier, but I'll also speak for other universities within Louisiana. First and foremost really is the issue of affordability, that we certainly have been able to attract lots of students to our respective campuses. The challenge is keeping them there because of cost. And even the public universities are experiencing the same kinds of challenges as it relates to getting students in and keeping them there in order for them to be able to get the quality educational experience they need in order for them to move out. In terms of my direct experience at Xavier, what I've seen change quite a bit is that black families in particular have had a harder time really trying to afford a private education that students get at Xavier, but also even public education. The national recession really hit black families very hard. Many of those families who had their investments in real estate, and as you well know, real estate, when the recession hit, the biggest area, the area that got hardest hit was those that were in those real estate investments. And so as a result of that, even middle-class black families were impacted tremendously. And many times what you'll find within the African American population, is that those families really do want to send their kids on to college because they want to increase or improve the opportunities that they themselves may not have had, or even if they went to college, they want their students or their children to be one or two rungs above where they were, not only economically, but also in terms of the kinds of contributions that they can make to the community. And so affordability wasn't, even though they struggled in the past, now what we see after the recession is that families really are making decisions clearly on what's in their pocketbooks, what they can afford. And so as a result of that, although the cost or the price tag of a Xavier education is about $18,000 per year, we're having to write a whole lot of it, as Dr. Francis, our president. That's another unique feature, by the way. Xavier has the longest serving college president in the United States. Dr. Francis has been serving as president of Xavier for 45 years. And he's been at Xavier working for 52 years. And still going strong. It's like that ever-ready bunny, right? He's going and going, but and very effective in his leadership. As a matter of fact, he was recently selected by U.S. News and World Report as one of the most effective leaders in the United States. So we've been very, very fortunate to have him at the helm for all of these years, and I'm sure he can attest to the fact that the issue of affordability is probably more prominent now than we've ever seen it before. But in addition to affordability, it's the constant reclarification of our brand and understanding who we are. Because as you well know, the generations of students that continue to come before our doors, their needs are changing and their interests are changing. And so the reality is that a lot of institutions struggle with the fact of, do you change because of the fact that you see the generations changing, or do you hold to the brand or to the essence and core of who you are, and then find a way to make sure that those students can benefit effectively from the educational experience that you offer. And so I'll stop there, but affordability and the reframing and the constant rethinking of the brand, of the essence and core of who you are as a higher education institution, I would think certainly two examples of what we consider to be challenges and what we continue to work toward.
Thank you all. 10 years ago, when I became a chief academic officer myself, the A word my faculty didn't want to speak aloud was assessment. Now assessment is considered fundamental to gathering the data essential to inform decision-making about academic programs. It could be argued, however, that assessment got its foothold due to another A word, accreditation. And it was the regional accreditors who insisted that colleges and universities develop cultures of assessment on their campuses. What's been your experience with these two activities? Since we met on an accreditation visit, Dana, why don't you start?
I really don't like the term culture of assessment. So we'll start with that one. That's the elephant in the room. You probably are well aware of that, because I think that what I love about, well, let me give you a personal experience. We went through accreditation in 2009 at the Air Force Academy. It was every 10-year accreditation. And so as part of that, we had a lot of change leading up to that. So we called in our liaison from the Higher Learning Commission and said, could you look under our rugs and make sure none of these dust bunnies we should worry about, so that we know we're at least on the right path to having a good accreditation visit. And that was helpful, but she said we really ought to get someone in to help us with assessment. So we started some really heavy lifting on what were our outcomes, how were we measuring them, but what happened was the faculty became so focused on the assessment piece, it was like an appendage. And eventually we said, you know what, really what we're talking about is really responsible education, and we're talking about developing a culture of learning. And assessment is it's an important part of that learning. So let's lay out what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And that goes back to, was it Yogi Berra who said, if you don't know where you're going, you won't know when you get there. Or if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. I think that's another quote. So that, where are we trying to go? what's the flight path? Sorry for the Air Force analogy. The flight path that we're gonna go on to get there. And then what are our assessment devices, our monitors that are gonna tell us whether or not we're getting close to where we're trying to go and how we can correct course, right? So I despise culture of assessment because it makes it seem like it's separate than what we do. We do responsible learning development work, and so let's call it a culture of learning, and it has much more impact there from the student to programs to the institution to the culture that I think is much more beneficial than assessment by itself.
I feel a little strongly about that.
I am unequivocal on that point.
Yogi Bahr also said if you get to a fork in the road, take it. Loren, your expertise is in accreditation.
Well, it is, and also my background is in educational psychology, so assessment is near and dear to my heart. But the reality is that also, I believe that if there is going to be effective change in any kind of way, particularly in higher education, that it has to be linked somehow to an understanding of where you were in order to get to where you want to be, very similar to what you've just described. And that oftentimes in higher education, you are so right, Dr. Todd, that there is that direct linkage between assessment and that we've got to do assessment because it's the only way that we can retain our accreditation. But really, that's not the issue. The issue really is if you want to continue to evolve and to get better and to improve your programs and improve your operations, wouldn't you want to know exactly what are those things, those challenges that are preventing you from getting there, and then creating a plan of action in order to be able to resolve those issues to arrive at where you need to be. And so it's not necessarily a culture of assessment, but it's for me, it's an understanding of how you can arrive effectively at change. And that every single faculty member, I say at Xavier, that we're all responsible. We have to consider ourselves to be responsible change agents. And with that, it comes the responsibility of being able to really understand who you are and then how do we get to where we want to be. Let me just mention this quick thing about accreditation. I don't know, those of us and those of you who have been in any work that you've done in the area of accreditation, most of you are considered, or most of us are considered strange animals. Who in the world would love accreditation work? I am one of those people. Let me tell you how bizarre this is and to give you an analogy for it. So my sister absolutely loves Wheel of Fortune. And so I know that you're saying, how is this going to connect? It's getting and so this happened about 3 or 4 years ago. I'll never forget it. I get a letter in the mail indicating that I have been selected to come and compete for a seat on Wheel of Fortune. And could not understand for the life of me how I just received this letter until I learned that my sister had sent in, trying to live vicariously through me, had sent this letter in to Wheel of Fortune, and so I did actually go. And we started out with, it was 5,000 people in this room, huge, huge room, literally 5,000 people, and you started working these puzzles. And so I made the first cut down from 5,000 to 2,500. Then I made the second cut from 2,500 to 1,000. I was like, I thought I was more of a Jeopardy person, but maybe this is turning out pretty good here. So made the cut all the way down to the top 25, and they were going to select 10 who would actually be taped for the show. And so I thought we were going to do for the top 25 just the way we've been doing before, right? Just solving puzzles. Well, this go around they did something differently. They brought us, the 25, each into a separate room, and they put cameras in front of us. And the very first thing they said was camera and microphone. And usually I'm not intimidated by this, but they said, tell us the one thing you're most passionate about. And I said, accreditation plan. Seriously. And and so the interviewer says, well, what's that? So I started start explaining and it gets muddier and muddier. So they said, well, you know, wait by the phones tomorrow. And needless to say, I didn't get the cut. But there is a passion there because I have seen them. I've worked with over 100 universities throughout the country in helping them to plan effectively for accreditation. And it's really more of a transformation. And what I mean by that is that it's a transformation of responsibility, of understanding that accreditation really is designed to allow you to look internally and to understand your warts and understand your strengths, and then how to build upon that. And that, you know, it's not about having folks coming in and mandating that you must do X, Y, and Z, but it really is the beauty and the value of self-assessment and understanding how you can continue to be a very strong and vibrant university.
Thank you so much. Anything you want to talk about with assessment or accreditation, Chris?
Well, I think like Dana, we don't use the term assessment very often. Assessment is part of good teaching. And so we talk a lot about teaching. We are engaged in a 7-year long, that sounds very long, a long process to revise our university-wide assessment system, our student learning outcomes assessment system. But we don't talk about that so much. We talk about the outcomes. So we have the year of effective communication, the year of inquiry and problem solving, the year of, so we've designated each year to work on our outcomes and ensuring that we have the programs and the assessments in place to meet those outcomes. So the conversation is really about our mission and outcomes. It's not so much about assessment, kind of what you said, but makes sense. And I appreciate the accreditors. We are the accreditors, by the way. There is no accreditor out there. It's professionals within the disciplines, within the field. But I appreciate that it's no longer a one-shot, you know, look in time. It's over time. Now the accreditors are really focusing on, we are focusing on continuous change and continuous improvement. And even in the process of accreditation, it has changed from being just that, you know, every 10 years to now there's something almost every year that we're doing that's related to accreditation or for accreditation. So I think that's been a positive change in the model of accreditation, recognizing the fact that we're all changing constantly.
We were talking along about outcomes over lunch, and several of you had experience with the degree qualifications profile of the Lumina Foundation, which is a relatively well-known model for outcomes-based learning. But there's another piece of that is a little bit more controversial, called competency-based curriculum. And this one I know you feel strongly about, Christine, so why don't you start on that?
Well, I'm trying to wrap my head around it still, to be honest. I mean, I truly do think that identifying the competencies or the outcomes for a particular course or program or degree, that's important, and that's what teachers do every day. You're teaching a class, you have to know what it is that you're teaching and what you want the students to know or be able to do at the end of that course. So it's really important that we identify competencies for our curriculum, for our programs. Competency-based education, as I understand the model, doesn't necessarily include any classroom instruction. It's assessing what students know or can do outside of classroom instruction. So it's literally earning a degree by completing a list of tasks or assignments or whatever you want to call them, competencies or what they're called. And I don't know if that model will work. I don't know if that is a good model for students. I think there is something beyond just being able to do your homework or do assignments. I think there's something that students learn from being with a community of learners and interacting with an instructor. And I don't see that piece in competency-based education models that are out there right now, but I'm perhaps not understanding them as well as I need to. So I'm open to the idea that maybe I'm just not educated on what the model really is, but I also fear it a bit because I think the teacher and student relationship is the most important in education. Our students tell us that all the time. The ones who graduate, what did you like best about McKendree? The faculty, the relationship with faculty. And I don't see how they have that in a competency-based education model. So I'm fearful of the model, but I also understand that students need to get through programs and earn degrees, and that's an important outcome. So I'd love to hear everyone's opinion about competency-based education, or if someone knows more about it than I do, maybe I don't have a full understanding of how it works. We've not adopted it yet at McKendree. I say that because you never know, we change all the time, so.
Well, if there's anyone in the audience who's experiencing that or practicing that on your campus, please step to the mic and join the conversation. Any other comments on that?
No, other than the first, I guess, thought that I had when we were talking about it over lunch was when you focus on just the knowledge and the skills part of it, you know, since I talked about the Air Force and the Navy earlier, I'll now talk about the Army, because I think we have somebody from West Point here, don't we? Right. Hey, okay. So the Army has a model called B, which is the student, or who you are, and then know and do, be, know, do. And the know is really the knowledge piece, which is mostly education, and the do is mostly skills, which is typically talked about in terms of training. And so the know and the do are what it sounds like, the competency base, but so much of what transforms our students is the who they are. I think to go back to helping them basically ignite in their own growth and development, which the B part is the biggest part of it. And it's how do they interact with other people? Are they respectful? How do they communicate? And who are they? And so I think that maybe there's a role for competency-based, but I don't think it does it's not the same in meeting what we do in a liberal education environment.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. The B aspect oftentimes ties into the mission of your university, and that what makes your university unique in such a way whereby the graduates of your university, that they go out and they become ambassadors for the university based on core elements that's important to the university and to the mission of the university. And so what bothers me about the competency-based education, especially the degree qualifications profile, for which we've been a part of that project as well, at least the pilot project, is that we made it very clear there was a group of HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, that were a part of the initiative. That there are these strands, like 5 strands. And so when you look at those strands, how do you find the mission of the university? How do you make sure that for Xavier, for instance, where we want to make sure that students master leadership skills, that we want to make sure that they master the ability to work effectively with the oppressed and the underserved, and we also want them to have a very rich opportunity to continue to serve their community. Where do you find those elements that are specific to the university when you're looking at competency-based education? Because not only are you trying to obviously allow them to shape them into strong professionals, but strong persons as well, strong citizens. And so that's the one aspect that probably bothers me the most that we did express when we were going through the pilot project. The flip side, in terms of the positive aspect that we talked about earlier, is that it did force our campus, and we do it on a regular basis already, but to go through curricular mapping exercises, and that I do like the opportunity to understand what are those knowledge and skills and how they connect from one course to another, and that the depth of those competencies, how are they actually being addressed in such a way that you have full confidence by the time that student actually graduate that they really have mastered this set, the core set of knowledge and skills that's going to help them to become better professionals. And so, there are value-added sides or aspects of it, and then there are other sides that still leave question marks in my mind and certainly in the minds of others.
And I'll get to your question in a moment, because I was also involved in the DQP at Marshall University. We were piloting the mapping, the curriculum mapping. And I know that they've just come out with the DQP 2.0 on the basis of the response of those of us who were involved in various pilot projects. And I think that openness of that process may lead to an instrument that is eventually useful, and particularly not to be so trendy as the competency-based degree programs that some institutions are adopting, but to apply it more across the curriculum. Yes, please.
I'm Blake Hightower, somewhat reluctant to mention my institution. I've been asked to design a competency-based program for public school principals so that they can have their certification. And I'm very conflicted about that. I think I'm echoing some of the concern that may have been expressed here, because there's a moral imperative for these school leaders. The student is not my end user. My student is not my end user, but it's the K-12 population is really the end user of what I'm giving to my students. In the competency-based format, and it's been explained to me by the higher-ups at my college that this is about increasing our profit margin, that people can simply enroll in the competency-based program. I'm to design it in such a way as they can demonstrate the competency 1 through 9 and then pass their certification exam and go be a school principal. However, there's much more to being a school principal than passing the certification exam, which leads me into the comment that I want to tell you, that I want to say about assessment. If a single test is all we need to determine if someone can be a school principal or be an engineer, then what about the moral implications of learning within a society and the obligations we have to serve one another? I'm struggling with this because I was a K-12 person for 27 years before moving to the university. I am very concerned about profit margins being our motives for the next trend in education. And whether that's a MOOC format for online learning or whether it's competency-based education, doesn't really matter to me, because we've forgotten our moral responsibility if we bow to the dollar in higher education. Just my comment.
Thank you, Blake. Response?
The thing that, those were great comments, and I appreciate your being transparent as well, with the exception of not naming your institution. What I heard was a concern about the testing. You know, it's you either have it or you don't kind of thing, which is so far away from learning and, you know, a growth mindset of continual development, which we hope would be what our superintendents would bring into the K through 12 environment. But I wonder if there's not a way to reframe that, in that, you know, that it can be a moneymaker and it can be something that helps get people at least to whatever competency is required, and then there might be, I hate to say this, but even more profitable follow-on things where you feel morally you're doing things like more leadership development, character development programs, or partnerships of superintendents who, once they're in the jobs, are facing similar challenges, that you as a faculty can help guide them through those cases together in some kind of executive type program. So I wonder if there's not a way to reframe what you're doing that gets it more on track, given the situation that you've been put in.
I've started to use a phrase over the past year. It feels to me like we are in a culture that wants education to be cheaper, faster, easier. And we're in an arms race almost as institutions to try to come up with that cheaper, faster, easier track for students, and that worries me a lot. We try so hard to focus on quality education. Our mission is to provide a high quality education to outstanding students. And we use those words, high quality education, all the time, almost as a way to remind ourselves that despite what's going on around us, we're focused on quality education. And That's not necessarily what the public and the media wants us to be. They want it to be cheaper, faster, and easier. Degree completion is the most important thing right now. That's what everybody wants, is to complete the degree. And I think we should be more focused on what students learn, not what degree they get, or if they get a degree, it's what they learn. We need an educated society, not a lot of people running around with degrees that don't mean anything. So our focus is on quality and education, and that's where it should be, but I don't think that's what the media is focusing on right now.
Your comment made me, put me in the mindset of what's happening in New Orleans. Since Hurricane Katrina, there's been a real shift from traditional public schools to charter schools. As a matter of fact, there are very few traditional public schools that are even remaining now in New Orleans. And the interesting aspect of it is that when you start looking at why these charter schools, some of them are failing, a lot of it has to do with finances. And what I mean by that is that many of these principals that are being trained don't have the kind of savvy as it relates to finances and business in order for them to really be effective in managing these schools effectively. So when you go to the mindset of a singular test to assess whether or not you are certified to become a principal, and in many cases in Louisiana, certified to become an effective principal, then I often worry about those other aspects, just as you've mentioned, that are really important, that are very, very different now in terms of the shift that we have seen, certainly in my, I want to say county, because most of you are in counties, but as you know, in Louisiana's parishes, that's happening in Orleans Parish, where the kind of training really has got to be differentiated for those principals who are interested in charter school management versus traditional public school management.
You have a question over here, comment?
Yes, my name is Sandy Venom, and I'm from the University of Houston in Victoria, and I hear a common theme that I talk about a lot. And I think that in higher education, we may have gone from a parental model that we serve the community by educating people so that when they get on the outside of our institutions, they can function and be good citizens, to more of a business model. So the university, in particular, Ryan, is run pretty much on a business model, where we now basically call our students consumers, and we've gone through consumer training to be sure that we don't insult our customers, which are our students. It's taped. But anyway, but I've already been in trouble at my own institution many, many times. But anyway, so I was wondering how we could potentially go about educating the public in general about how it's better for society, for the university or the institution, to put people on the outside that may have done things that they didn't like and weren't fast and expedient in their point of view, but it's better for society as a whole. And how could we do that and get that message out, which I think is very congruent with our institution here.
Thank you.
Right before I left the Air Force Academy, we had gone through a process for a balanced scorecard approach to our overall accountability for our institution, for our strategic plan, and for our learning outcomes. And we struggled over, are our students customers or not? And we ended up, actually the faculty rose up to say, absolutely the cadets are customers, but it's not just them. There are internal. But then, because our graduates go out and serve as officers in the United States Air Force, the United States Air Force, and ultimately society, are our customers. And so we need to both look internally as well as externally. And so that balance there, I think, helped us stay focused on, you can do it bigger. You know, you want to graduate in 2 years, this is what you get. And so it kept us focused on quality products, quality students entering in as officers, quality people serving. But we're moved away from the balanced scorecard approach now in the last year and have moved more towards what you started to talk about earlier about the essence of your brand. And what is the essence? Because budgets have been cut in half. And when your budget's cut in half, you know, if you lose half of your income, you start, or you lose your health, or whatever, you start to re-question, who am I? And institutions go through that as an essence of who are we as an institution now? What are our core things that we need to do, and we need to do them well? And what are the things that we divest, and what are the things that we maybe refocus on? So I guess my response back is, I don't think it's a bad thing that you're focused on your students, because their learning is really, truly something that we faculty and administrators are focused on. But the business part of it is you've got to deliver for society or whatever. You've got to stay focused on that as well to make sure there's a link back and forth. But I thank you for your transparency also.
Well, the only thing I would add, would put me in the mindset of as well is, right after Katrina at Xavier, pre-Katrina, our enrollment was going to be 4,000 students. And of course, as you know, Katrina hit on August 29th. We had just started school for the first week. And so that was the highest enrollment that the university had ever experienced. Our infrastructure probably holds about 4,000 students total. Well, we plummeted from 4,000 to 2,900. And you can only imagine what those backroom discussions were like, not only for Xavier, but many of the other institutions within New Orleans about what are we going to do, because the finance side was really important. What was really clear for Xavier is that we had to continue the kind of learner centered paradigm that we already had. And so I mentioned earlier over lunch that our president has been very strong, and so have we as the other administrators at Xavier, that we make it very clear to families that once we admit you or your child into Xavier, then we have an absolute responsibility to make sure that they graduate from this university. And part of that is tied to the imperative that we have right now, because we're such a very strong STEM institution. As you well know, the biggest gap that you've got right now in the United States is born minorities in STEM disciplines. And so we've got that urgency that's hanging out there for us to not only prepare them, but prepare them very well, and to get them out within a time frame where they can go on and to continue their career path, be it in graduate or professional school or directly into the workforce. And so the difference in what you've just described as being, and I make it clear all the time as provost, that we've got to make absolutely sure that we are a well-oiled machine. And I hate to call it that, but that's what I say to them, because of the fact that every aspect has to work together, and it's got to work well. The support services arm, if we fail in any way, I can assure you that these students are not going to reach the goal that they need to reach within the time frame. If fiscal services and financial aid isn't providing the kind of support, then we're going to fail. So you've got the wheel, and every cog in the wheel must work effectively in order for us to best serve our students and our families. It's a different mindset. It arrives at the same goal of making sure that we can get these students in and train them well, and make sure that we're providing the kind of customer service environment that's needed. But it's from the paradigm of the learner and getting that student prepared and ready for the workforce.
Want to add anything?
No, that's okay.
Dr. Jensine.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Gypsy Denzine. I'm at West Virginia University, and this has been a terrific conversation. I think I've been holding a question in my mind for so long, waiting for a panel like this. And if I can, just for a minute, shift the conversation. And I've been thinking a lot. I'm very curious about the topic of presidential searches. So the latest trend that we're seeing an increase in is that there's a screening committee, but the university campus community and the state does not see the finalist until they come to campus and it's announced. So it's kept confidential all the way through the entire process. There's no public on-campus forum, faculty. So we're seeing an increase in that trend, and we saw it in the hiring of athletic directors starting 3-4 years ago. And I don't mean to be critical of the model, but we see that coming in both medium-sized and public institutions of higher education. I'm curious on your thoughts of that, of when the board selects the president and the campus community is informed and they are flown in for the first time, and this is our new president? And also, in that this is impacting athletic directors, do you think this is going to be a model that will see the hiring of provosts in this manner?
All right, I'll go first. As we all peer at each other. Most of you know that there are three kinds of searches: closed, open, and hybrid. And you know, I'm more of an advocate, and always have been, of either I'm the advocate for the hybrid model, where that you've got to understand that the reality is that most boards believe that the closed model works best, because if you're going to go after the very best that's out there, they don't want their names advertised. And not only want it advertised, but they may be in a sitting position that their board, his or her board, might not be aware that they are now seeking another opportunity. For an institution like Xavier, and then also other institutions that we've worked with in the state of Louisiana, we've really tried hard to maintain the hybrid model, because at some point, you've got to reveal to the campus, at least at the point that, even if it's at the point that you've got your finalists, that here are your three finalists, but also the fact that give the campus the opportunity to meet these three finalists, weigh in on their thoughts through a written evaluation that can go to the search committee, and then allow that to be a part of the larger evaluation process that the search committee would use in order to make its final decision. I believe wholeheartedly in that particular model. The reality is that you're absolutely right. More and more boards are electing for the closed model, because they really do believe that that's the only way that they're going to be able to be aggressive in going after sitting leaders who, under other circumstances, would not want their names out there.
I've only been involved in the hybrid model, and I can't really imagine on our campus a totally closed model. I think the culture wouldn't support that. I can't imagine that happening.
And just imagine if, because typically on a search committee, if it's a good search committee, especially for a presidential search, you want to have at least a faculty member, right? You want to have a student, you want to have an alum. Can you imagine a closed model, the kind of pressure that's on that faculty member and that student? Because many of them will have to have signed oaths of confidentiality, but if it's closed, you can only know that that faculty member is going to be under tremendous pressure to at least reveal some information, even if it's not specifics about the name, but at least the qualifications of the individuals that are applying for the role. So, I mean, I just, as I said, I'm not an advocate at all for the closed model.
You know, it's interesting that, Gypsy, you raised that question, thinking of searches. The Inside Higher Ed did a survey of chief academic officers several years ago. I remember participating in it. Did you also? I did. And the result was that only 20% of sitting provosts were at all interested in becoming presidents, which is a new trend, because in the past, the provost position, the chief academic officer position, was the feeder to the presidency, and now it's changed remarkably. And the faculty not quite very content with that always, because you find development officers, you find business officers sometimes, and of all things, lawyers becoming presidents, and it raised the issue of the terminal degree. It also raises the issue of the academic commitment to academics of that leader. But provosts see the presidency as not a career goal necessarily by any means, and that it's a big change from the past. Alex, you have a question.
Thank you, Mary. My name is Alex Herbst. I'm a student at Plymouth State University. I'm actually not a faculty member like many of the people that are here today. And I wanted to backtrack a little bit to two topics that are near and dear to my heart. I've been involved with student government and student life at Plymouth State now for the past 3 years. And I've seen firsthand in the state of New Hampshire how cost of attendance and the idea of using a university as a business model has impacted our students. And I can tell you from my perspective and the perspective of students at my school, we're not very happy about it. I think that going back to some of the comments I made earlier, using a university as a business model is not really ideal for the students. To me, I see universities and colleges as needing to be a partnership between the faculty, the staff, the administration, and the students, and they're working together to be able to further higher education, further themselves and society. That's what we should be advertising to our students. That's what we should be advertising in public. We shouldn't be saying about anything about the bottom line. We're not in this, I didn't join student government to get ahead and to find a way to make money. I don't make any money doing what I do. So I know that in higher education, we're not really here to make money. We're really here to be able to educate the students. And then that goes back to the cost of attendance. Every year, cost is going up at a lot of these universities and colleges around the country, and it is strangleholding our students in that they are limiting their options. They're cutting back on places that they can choose to go. I know I had to eliminate some choices in my time when I was applying for them because it was too expensive. My mother, my single mother, couldn't afford it. So it's a stranglehold on all of us, and in the end, it's just gonna hurt all of us as a whole as a society. So I guess my real question for you three would be, well, how do we fix what has already been broken? How do we go back to a point where we can have a higher education system, where students can have the choices that they want, and we can focus on education and not on the business side of it? Or have we already gone off the cliff? Can we not come back from that?
Well, there's a number of people I just wanted to make sure you're aware of who are as concerned as you and have put together a documentary film. I've only seen the trailer, but we've mentioned it over lunch. It's called Ivory Tower, and it's alarmist to the sense that it has one of those clocks ticking about how the student loan debt now is in excess of $1.2 trillion, and which has exceeded the national credit card debt currently. So the concern about the sustainability of higher education, whether some schools can stay in business and whether some students can stay in school, is a big, big issue. Let's let the panel tackle that.
I think part of the reason that the cost has gone up is because students are seeking amenities, and a lot of amenities. And so schools are really competing with each other to bring in students by offering whatever it is that the students want, whether it be residence halls or programs or climbing walls. We don't have a climbing wall yet, but that's the word that everyone uses. So, we're in a situation where we want to provide what the students want, and increasingly they want things that are not just instruction. They want things that are beyond instruction. They want the opportunity to participate in sports, and they want beautiful, places to live. And so we have to provide those to some extent. With that said, in a not-for-profit institution, we don't talk about making money, we talk about keeping the doors open, making enough money so that we can pay the people who work there for that year. And it's not about making money for shareholders. We don't have shareholders. So it's about survival, really.
And maintaining a quality faculty
quality
base.
education.
Because that's what you want. You want a base of very strong faculty members who are experts in their field surrounding you as students and helping to prepare you so that you can enter the workforce being as well qualified and well prepared as possible. The other side of it as well, that two things when you talk about the collective responsibility for education, certainly students, but don't forget families as well. I heard you mention your mother, because a lot of students are not necessarily the ones to pay the bills on their own. It's their family members that are helping with that. But one of the pieces that we talked about while we were at lunch was obviously the growing number of students who are having to work. And because they're having to work, it's taking longer for them to actually complete the degree. On average now, it's between 5 and 6 years for a traditional undergraduate degree. And so with that, a lot of the universities now are looking more at the value and presenting it to families, students and families, to say that if there's any way possible, and I know that it's as hard as times are right now financially for families, that if there's any way to work to achieve the degree program and all the related experiences within a 4-year period and not have you as a student to work 30, 40 hours a week. Really, the beauty of it is that if you wouldn't work at all, that if we could just get you within that 4 years, and that it wouldn't take you 5 or 6, here's what you would save. So if you tack on those other 2 years, like for Xavier, for instance, we're $18,500, that's tuition only. So if it's taking you 6 years to complete what we have as a 120-hour curriculum that typically could take another student 4 years to complete, that means that you're tacking on close to 36, 37, really up to $40,000 more that you could save in your pocket in order to help you to go on to afford graduate or professional school, or to be able to afford your first apartment and or a new car when you go on into the workforce. And so it's that kind of mindset of this notion of out the door in 4, and provide universities providing the support structure to help you to complete within that time frame, so that it could be a win-win for both the university as well as for the student. I think it's hard, to be perfectly frank with you, for higher education not to look at itself as a business. I hate to say it, because it is. It is a business. It's a business within a higher education framework, but it's a business. And as I said, that business has to be able to afford to have the right people in place and to provide the right kind of experiences in order for students like you to be able to master the curriculum that you've got and to be as competitive as you should be when you leave that institution.
And I'll just share, I'm coming from a federal institution, even the federal budgets have been cut in half and then again in half. And so in order to maintain the kind of opportunity for the students in 4 years, we actually had to make a business case to set up research centers to bring external funding in from places like NASA, from the DARPA for research, from the offices, all external funds. But what it did was translate into the fact that, Boeing will give our students $30,000 to enter a competition with West Point and the Naval Academy to build a 7th generation fighter cockpit. And so it's a learning opportunity, but we had to build the business case to our Air Force to say this is why we're doing this. And it's for education, but it also is going to help us during these lean times to actually offer a stronger program. So I think we just have to be careful. Learning is the most important part of it. The business case helps us to do that better.
Thank you.
Dr. Silva.
My name is David Silva. I'm the Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs at the University of Texas at Arlington, and from a state in which our governor believes that you can get a 4-year degree for $10,000. You couldn't have set me up better for my question, which is, when I look at some of the facts of our students / consumers, and by the way, if they are customers, and the customer is always right, then when they enter, we should just hand them a degree. But I notice that they are taking 5.5 years, or 6 years to complete their degree, because at least in their mind, and maybe it may be cultural, it could be generational, it could be situational, that there is an expectation that they would be working at least part-time, maybe 15, 20, 25 hours a week. So my question to the panel is, all of the commentary I've heard today works under a very time-honored assumption that an undergraduate degree, the norm or the expectation, is that of 4 years. Are we at a point in our academic culture and in this country to maybe change that expectation such that there's some sort of reconciliation of fact and theory or fact and practice, and start to say, we need to move to a 5-year model? That an undergraduate degree is no longer a 4-year degree, but it's a 5-year degree, and we expect that part of that 5-year experience is going to be workforce related.
It's an interesting thought. The federal government is on a 6-year model, actually. They measure time to graduation at 150% time. So that's really what we report is graduation over 6 years. We also report 4 years, but it's the 6-year that people really compare. So I don't know, that's a good thought. And is time even a factor. If we go back to the competency-based education programs, one of the reasons those may take off is because time in classroom doesn't matter. There is no time in classroom. You pay a fee and you work as fast as you can through the competencies. And so maybe time spent in classroom in the future won't mean anything. You know, we can move to 5 years now is the expectation, but maybe in the future we won't even be talking about how long it takes to get the degree, or to finish the program, or to get the education. Let's say get the education rather than the degree.
One of the things we were talking about at lunch too was the programs that are so fixed from the moment the student matriculates that any change in program it tacks time on to the degree completion. And I happen to be a fan, as I noted then, of the undeclared student. Allow them some time to explore. You know, that's what college used to be for, at least for the first couple of years. But too many programs now and institutions are insisting that students declare prior to getting on campus. And I know at Marshall, I'll be a little critical as somebody here from Marshall might agree or disagree with me, but they organized the freshmen at the first day of orientation with t-shirts based on which college of the university they were majors in. And the kids who were undeclared, I always felt a little sorry for them because they always sat up in the bleachers sort of adrift because they didn't have a home yet. And that troubles me from a perspective of having been in this position of the student who doesn't like what he or she thought they were going to like when they started school and made that declaration, or doesn't find it doable, or finds some other passion along the way. Let's let you folks get in on that question too.
I was just shocked a little bit because the pressure that I was hearing was get it done sooner because it's so expensive. Can you not have a program that finishes, like the faster program that you can finish with 3 years? So, you know, that's the cheaper, faster, easier.
Right, and I'm advocating against that because the reality I'm seeing is that we can't do
taking
3
longer.
people are doing it in 5. Why not call it what it
It's
is?
tough.
Right.
Yeah.
And plus, we also add on experiences that we believe that would be valuable to the students, like study abroad, like internships, service learning. You know, some of those actually would create even more time for the student to complete the program as well. I just want to mention that the deciding major piece, that you know, we don't have that the model at Xavier where your first year that you would spend as, we used to call them undecided, and we realized that that was a negative framework, so we call them deciding majors now. Feels better, they like it, we like it. But that spend your first year as a deciding major, you know, as Dr. Todd mentioned earlier, you know, at Xavier, it's like everybody comes because everybody has the aspiration of being a doctor. You know, that's what they are, a medical health professional. And then once they get into the environment, they realize, well, maybe not. Either because I've not really been prepared sufficiently enough, or because of the fact that I really have more of an affinity for one of the liberal arts programs. And so with that, why not allow students to be able to navigate through in that first year and really feel their way through and come to a better understanding of themselves outside of the influence of their parents in terms of making decisions about who they really want to become as a professional. The one thing that we have done much better at Xavier is that, and we don't have that model that I just described, although I do like it, is that we do have a deciding major, and that we give students up to 2 years within that deciding major, largely because of the fact that our Gen Ed core is so large. We have a 60-hour Gen Ed core. And so you have enough time to really take those kinds of Gen Ed courses before you would begin your specialized coursework. But that the deciding majors, that really we're getting more and more students that are electing to start as a deciding major. So we've got a whole framework built around that so that they don't feel like they're the ones without the t-shirts.
The question here is.
I'm Bill Logan from Murray State University. My views are definitely not those of Murray State University.
It has seemed to me, as someone who's been in this business for a long time, that there are two fundamental flaws with assessment the way it's done. We assess courses and programs by almost always measuring what the student knows at the end. We almost never measure what they know when they start. They could theoretically know most of what they know at the end before they started, in which case we've taught them almost nothing. Or they could know relatively little, but have known absolutely nothing. In which case we've done a pretty good job. So I think that there's a basic research flaw in that we only measure part of what we need to know. And you could never get that through peer review in a journal. But academic administrators just wave it through. The other thing is, I think we're measuring the wrong thing. It's what's important is what they're doing 5 and 10 years after they graduate. Are they happy and productive citizens? Are they pursuing a career? Are they showing the benefits of being an educated person? So we're measuring, I think, the wrong things in the wrong way. Don't worry. I mean, you can tell the dean, he'll just wave his head today. He'll respond to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm in violent agreement with you, but I also am very happy that, well, at least the Air Force Academy, we've started to do the baseline assessments for things like critical thinking, using the critical thinking assessment test, so you kind of get a national as well. And then we're able to look at our program that's intentional towards developing that. How is it working in different programs? Do our scholar students advance in their critical thinking using a great books methodology with our top professors differently than our core curriculum and those kinds of things? But the other thing is that we also follow up on them. We can track all of our graduates at the Air Force Academy.
It's probably a little easier for you.
Exactly. So there is a model out there, and we actually stay with the same outcomes to see not only, it's usually reported by supervisors and their opinions of whether or not people are displaying what it is we targeted developing them to be like. But I think you bring up some great points that I think are absolutely spot on with the ideal. Very hard to do, but very important if you really want to figure out what difference are you making.
There are some instruments that are designed that way. The NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement, measures freshmen and seniors. I mean, that's the two populations that get measured. The CLA, the Collegiate Learning Assessment, is also a measure that was focused on value added. That's the term they use. So they measure, what your students are expected to know and be able to do based on what they came in with, and then compare how much they learned at your institution versus other institutions. So the value that your institution added. We don't use that assessment at McKendree, but it's an interesting interesting tool. And then at McKendree, we have some programs that actually have created their own pre and post test for their program. Our psychology program did that. They give all their freshmen, all their incoming students in Psych 101 an assessment, and they give the same thing at the very end to their graduating seniors, those who've gone through the major, and they actually look at the value added and what they have learned, and have learned a lot from that about where the gaps are too. So it can be done, but you're right, you do kind of have to measure 2 points in time to get some real meaningful data.
Wasn't that part of the critique of academically driven? Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
Okay, this is another topic. I'm Jacqueline Bryce Finch at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and I've had the joy and terror of moving from the professoriate into full-time administration. And I
welcome aboard.
Yeah. Okay. My friends in the professoriate, of course, told me I was moving to the dark side, but I looked at it as an opportunity to really get involved in policy and procedures, which is my passion. My question is, or I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the politics of senior administration. I heard that there is a living president who's been a president for 45 years.
That's correct.
But the trend now seems that with senior administrators, they're moving in and out you know, almost like every 4 years or so. I mean, that loyalty to the university habit seems to have changed. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that matter.
I work with the president who's been in office for 20 years, but certainly exceeds the national average. I do think you're right, the average is about 4 to 5 years for a presidency. And I guess in any organization, if you have a lot of turnover, that is probably not good for the organization. But I don't know if anyone's really studied that. Maybe because higher ed has to change so much, it actually is a good thing that the leadership changes regularly. Maybe it's a good thing. We assume it's a bad thing, but I'm not sure I've ever read the data or anyone's ever studied that to see if it makes a difference. I love the fact that our president's been there for 20 years. He knows everybody, he knows the system, and it's just wonderful. There's a continuity there. But it might also be a good thing to have a president change every 5 years, and that would be all right. Does anyone know a study that's looked at that and actually tried to assess?
One of our new dissertation awards will go to that.
There you go.
This wasn't part of my question, but I'm going to jump in. There are some studies, but the problem with the studies are they're created on so many different bases that they're not at all comparable. You can't really do much with them.
Yeah. It would be tough to measure the factors that go into a successful organizational change. You know, is it all the president's influence too? So there are plenty of other factors that matter other than the length of presidency.
I actually started looking at some of those questions when I was doing my Ph.D. in higher education 30 years ago. Well, no, a little more than that now. My question is, this is too good an opportunity to not ask 3 senior academic specialists, professionals, what are the essential qualities on one hand and skills that makes for a good provost?
Oh, we talked about that at lunch, actually. I think 99% of the job is problem solving. So I spend most of my day listening to people who have issues, concerns, suggestions, recommendations, problems to be solved. It's really a matter of listening, hearing the big picture, multiple perspectives, and then helping people make decisions. I don't really believe that I make a lot of decisions as a provost, but I help groups make decisions. I help other people make decisions. I help us move forward in certain directions, but I didn't come in with an agenda. I don't have a place I want to go in particular. My job is to help a large number of people think together. So there's a lot of problem solving and critical thinking involved in the job, and there's no training for it, and there's no test for it, by the way. Thank God there's no test for it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly that there's got to be a tremendous amount of skill in problem solving and other people's problems, typically, that come to you that you've got to resolve. But in addition to that, I think it was well stated that it's understanding the depth of the problem. I remember once sitting with our Commissioner of Higher Education, Dr. Joe Savoy, who's now serving as president of the University of Louisiana Lafayette, and he described it as like an onion, so that typically people will come to you and they'll give you the outer layers of the onion, and that the reality is that if you're really going to solve it and understand it, you got to go to the core of the onion. And so it's really trying to find a way to make sure, and then I think that in time, my colleagues would agree with me, that you learn how to get to the core much quicker. Not all the time, but most times, because you really want to get to the root of the situation in order to be able to resolve it. Other characteristics: flexibility. You've got to be a good consensus builder. You've got to be ready for the unexpected every day, maybe every minute. Sense of humor, yeah, the levity side is just really, really essential. And I think that more than anything else as well is also understanding that you've got to have a commitment to care of self, because this is a tough job.
I'd like to add just one: integrity and with integrity, because there's lots of ways you can serve there, but also authenticity, just be who you are, I think is critically important. But one that I learned kind of the hard way, which I think is more of a skill, is you're going to be under attack for something, whether you're in court or whether you're, there's something, because you are in the position of authority, you're going to find yourself at some point attacked. And one thing that is so critically important, our natural tendency is to look over at the missile that's coming at us. And by doing that, or that way, you lose focus on really what everybody's counting on you to do. And it took Sully Sullenberger to teach me that lesson, Miracle on the Hudson. I was in the middle of the firestorm, I was in court, there were all kinds of things going on. And it was a personal attack on my integrity, which there's nothing worse when somebody questions you, and publicly, in the New York Times and other things. And what I ended up hearing him say to our students, one of the students asked him in front of 4,000 students, they said, did you ever, when you were landing on the Hudson, think about failure? And he didn't miss a beat. He said, absolutely not. I focused on landing that plane, saving all souls, and I solved one problem to the next, focused on that end goal. And it was like a light bulb went off, and I went, oh my gosh, I've lost my way. I need to stay focused. We learned that in driver's ed, right? Don't look at the ball coming into the street. Stay focused, drive through the accident. So that's, I think, the most important lesson I learned, unfortunately the hard way, but it's memorable when you learn it that way, and I hope you all don't have to.
Terry, I just want to add something to that. I had two things come to mind. One is a quote that says, the hardest instrument in the orchestra to play is second fiddle. And that position, which is next in line to the president, and most often first among equals, as it was described to me when I was given that position, is a balancing act. And it came back to me when a senior faculty member came to me and she said, you have the hardest job in the university. Damned if you do and damned if you don't, because of the responsibility you have to the senior administrator who's appointed you, and to the faculty and professional staff that you oversee, but particularly as if you're in the dean of the faculty role.
Thank you very much. I was positing as I listened to your answers that there were probably at least 3 different styles on the stage, but I also thought that there was an essence that we needed to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last question.
Well, hopefully this will set this in Phi Kappa Phi. I'm Mary Bonham from Florida Institute of Technology, and seeing as we're sitting here at the Phi Kappa Phi Biennial Convention, my question has to do with how can we as chapter members help you do your job better, and how can folks in positions as yours help us do our jobs as Phi Kappa Phi chapters better?
That's a good question. Great. What I love about Phi Kappa Phi is its absolute focus on excellence in learning. I mean, it's just focused on learning and being the best in scholarly ways. So for us, Phi Kappa Phi is the most prestigious honor society. We have probably 30 honor societies, 25 I guess at McKendree. But Phi Kappa Phi is the most prestigious because it is singularly focused on high achievement. And I think, that's a good thing to celebrate academic achievement. So the more you can do to spread the word that it's great to achieve and to attain high standards of learning, I think that's helpful to us in doing our jobs.
Now, the other two people on the stage do not have chapters on the campuses that they serve quite yet, but they're on my list. Let me take an opportunity to respond from the Phi Kappa Phi perspective to what Christine just said. One of the things that we stress when we visit prospective chapters is that the senior administrator, this is in the President Provost meeting we hold, provide resources to the faculty who agree to serve as leaders of the chapter. They commit to that so that those folks are not themselves adrift or out there without the administrative support that they need. That's something we ask them to sign on to. From what you can do as chapters, you can make sure that you have initiated your provost and your president, but particularly your provost. At Marshall, when we got a new chapter, the speaker at our very first initiation was not the president, it was the provost, because of the academic piece and the academic excellence that we knew that we both stood for. And I think that's probably the best thing you can do. But I'd like to thank our panelists and thank the audience for participating. Let me close by thanking our board chair, Dr. Smathers, for this idea. I think it was splendid. There's a little time on your hands now for rest and refreshment, and we'll see you at the reception and then at dinner this evening.